The December 6 terrorist attacks at NAS Pensacola back in 2019. 3 sailors, of course, lost their lives when that Saudi military exchange student opened fire in Building 633. Now some survivors and their family members are looking for justice. And Matt Gaetz joins us live in the studio this afternoon to explain this. Thank you for being here, first of all. Second, how realistic is it that we're ever going to see any justice from Saudi Arabia? But you said you've had a recent conversation where you've been promised some stuff.
Well, in the initial wake of this terrorist attack, I spoke with Princess Rhea, who was Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States, and she assured me that the kingdom would participate in every investigation and be entirely cooperative. And what I'm here to tell you is that that promise has not been kept. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is fighting against records requests from the victims, some of the first responders who were on the scene running in the direction of bullets. And the United States Navy has also been dilatory, in my view, in getting records to those family members so they can really see the extent of the negligence or recklessness for the kingdom having someone in our country on our base that was radicalized.
Is there a strong link? We know it was a Saudi military exchange student who performed these heinous acts. Have you drawn a solid link between that and the Saudi government? Was there a causal relationship there?
Well, we drew a direct link to Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why the leader of the Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula was the target of a drone strike ordered by President Trump, in part in response to what happened in NAS Pensacola. The kingdom could have engaged in recklessness or negligence regarding their students that are here. The contracts that we have to allow those students to be in Pensacola require oversight, require vetting, require policies and procedures, and the litigants are claiming that those procedures weren't followed, and when they aren't followed, then there may be jurisdiction in a U.S. court for redress.
What do you think the chances are that these families, these victims, are going to see anything from the Saudi government?
Well, there is a law, the JASTA law, created in the wake of 9/11 to hold the kingdom accountable. But, Bob, I see a lot of similarities between 9/11 and this attack when it comes to how the kingdom is responding to the litigation. We've just learned recently, as a result of President Biden's disclosures, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was paying Omar al-Bayoumi, who was a Saudi intel official who was providing material support to 9/11 hijackers. And I see how long those families have had to wait. So I can't say it's going to be a quick process, but there's a hearing coming up in a couple of weeks before a Article 3 judge in Northwest Florida, and that hearing will determine whether or not the U.S. court system is the right jurisdiction to ensure that justice here is done. So certainly no guarantee. That's why we're hammering on the kingdom to get the records and fulfill the commitments they made to me personally, and it's also why we're very much on the United States Navy to produce the documents they have. The United States Navy should be on the side of our sailors and our first responders. They shouldn't be on the side of Saudi Arabia in this litigation.
How many people have you got behind this? How many victims? How many family members? How big is the group that's looking for this justice?
It's combined litigation, so it's a little complicated, but I know the litigation against the kingdom includes the family members of the deceased, it includes some who were injured but were not mortally wounded, and then it also includes some of the sheriff's office deputies who responded and provided that critical care in that critical time.
All right, let's shift gears. Recent vote, $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. You voted against it. A number of others did as well. Why'd you vote against it? What do you think we should be our contribution to this effort for Ukraine to keep the invasion back?
First of all, just way too much money. I mean, $40 billion, you're talking about more than twice the requested budget of Customs and Border Patrol to secure the U.S. border. I'm very concerned that there's not sufficient oversight over the arms that are going into Ukraine. A lot of those arms are ending up in the hands of the Azov Battalion. That's a group that 40 Democrats wanted to declare a foreign terrorist organization just 3 years ago because they claimed they were neo-Nazis and white supremacists. So while Democrats are like on the snipe hunt for white supremacy in America, they're voting to fund avowed white supremacists in Europe. I don't think it's wise to say anyone who's shooting at Russians should get unlimited, non-overseen U.S. aid and dollars. It's Stinger missiles to the Mujahideen in yesteryear, and it's looking more like javelins to neo-Nazis today in Ukraine.
Well, the last time you were here, we were discussing about the possibility of a third world war and how difficult the position the U.S. is in. You got to ride a tightrope between doing too much and starting World War III or doing too little and watching Ukraine disappear. Where's the line now as you see it? And when you think of $40 billion for helping but not starting World War III, what's your solution?
Well, I'm not sure that the $40 billion isn't going to start World War III. I gave a speech on the floor of the Congress this last week that urgently warned that the nation was being sleptwalked into a war that Congress never approved and I don't think the American people want. Here's where I think we should be positioned. Behind Europe. I think this has to matter more to Europe than it matters to the United States. I mean, you've got the Europeans watching us put $40 billion into Ukraine while they're buying Russian oil. Well, they're the ones that are essentially propping up the Russian war effort. So,
but they don't have a choice, really. I mean, where else are they going to get it? They haven't got a backup supply line for those.
Well,
Romania and Poland, and now you've got Finland and Sweden saying we want to join NATO, and Russia is escalating the rhetoric against those countries. There'll be retaliation.
Well, Turkey has objected to that.
This is slowly snowballing.
It is, and I think I worry more about Russia's nuclear weapons than I worry about their broken tanks in Ukraine. And that's why the $40 billion, again, way too much money, not enough oversight, and I think it could be very provocative.
Well, how much would you send then, and for what?
Well, I think we've sent enough, frankly. I think
so
we need over. I don't know that there are additional munitions that the United States should be sending to Ukraine right now, and I probably wouldn't be talking about the specific weapon systems too much on live television. I will say that we're not sending rifles and bullets anymore. We're sending howitzers that can fire 15 miles into Russia. What happens if there's a strike inside Russia from howitzers
there have been,
that U.S. officials have trained the Ukrainians on from their military and also supplied the weapons? I think that could be a dangerous escalation with a country that has 6,000 nuclear warheads and a country that I don't think the American people want war with.
But, all right, so let's juxtaposition the $40 billion to somehow help Ukraine in this fight versus the southern border. I mean, is that apples and oranges? I mean, we're talking about World War III and possible world peace compared to
But I think if you talk to most Northwest Floridians, they look at the issues that they encounter daily. And right now, the fact that we don't have, a secure southern border is killing Northwest Floridians as a consequence of fentanyl poisoning. I mean, that is something real, felt here. And I think to a lot of folks, it's ridiculous for our country to be $30 trillion in debt and be sending $40 billion to Ukraine and only $15.3 billion to secure a border that has become a turnstile right now. And that is causing more economic harm to Americans, and I think it's ultimately a greater national security threat to America.
All right, so what's next? What are you going to come up with as far as a solution? Instead of $40 billion, Matt Gaetz would do what with Ukraine?
Well, I think that the Ukrainians and the Europeans have to lead on this question. And while we have to assure Russia that any action against a NATO country would result in an Article 5 obligation to respond, I don't think that we need to be as excessively involved as we are. So the Matt Gaetz strategy would be to do less, not more in Ukraine.
And just watch and see, basically?
Well, again, I would encourage our allies like Germany, who are more directly involved, if they have no choice but to buy Russian oil in Germany, then perhaps they ought to have an enhanced obligation to provide for Ukrainian security relative to the United States.
Okay, let's switch. I know we're running out of time. We'll take the time. Switch to pandemic. I know I'm shotgunning you here with stuff, but some forecasts don't paint a very rosy picture for us in the winter. 100 million new cases, whatever else, might be a softer variant, whatever the case may be. Everybody's tired of talking about it. You must be tired about debating it. On where do we stand? Where does Washington stand on this pandemic, and what do you foresee over the next few months and into winter?
There was talk of additional legislation to print more money to fund hospital systems, and that was rejected even in the Senate by people like Joe Manchin, because a lot of the pandemic-inspired spending has led to the inflation that so many Americans are seeing impact them from the gas line to the grocery line. And so I think that the pandemic response really ought to decentralize this authority to states, to communities. I'm very confident in Florida's response to the pandemic, leaning more on the side of freedom than lockdowns. And when we really talk about the effect of this pandemic, it's not just going to be those who died of coronavirus directly. It's going to be the mental health consequences. It's going to be the economic consequences, the breakup of families, the destruction of lives from these lockdowns that I fear far more than the next incarnation of the pandemic.
You had 1 million people die in this country because of the virus. I mean, there's come some mental anguish from that as well.
Undoubtedly, this was a terrible virus. I think when Republicans take control, we ought to do a lot more to hold the Chinese accountable. I've even called for seizing China's assets. What would you do to
keep the virus accountable? How would you keep it in check? It seems like the days of asking people to wear masks, I don't know if that's ever going to happen again, given the current climate.
I wouldn't support that.
What about further research in vaccines? Is that ongoing? Are we spending money to make sure that we get ahead of this virus rather than chasing each variant that pops up?
Look, I always think we ought to ensure that the public health apparatus of the United States is searching for cures rather than searching for new ways to have control over people or cancel rent or have any other number of policies that restrict people's economic freedom. So while the number of people who've died is tragic, I think that our focus ought to be on holding China accountable and ensuring that the public health bureaucracy doesn't have the power over everyday American life as much as they have.
Well, as always, we could talk for another hour. I'm getting a wrap right now. Appreciate you coming in. Thanks for talking
to us.
Always a pleasure. Matt Gaetz, Northwest Florida Congressman.